What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors walks onto a daytime talk show, expecting an easy chat about his new film, only to find himself ambushed on live television? In just 34 seconds of barbed questioning, Denise Welch would push Sean Bean to his breaking point, igniting one of the most infamous walkouts in British TV history. The cameras were rolling, the audience was settled, and Sean Bean, who had survived arrows, swords, and dragons on screen, was about to face something far more dangerous: a smiling host with an agenda. Studio scene. Sean walked onto the Loose Women's set with his usual quiet grace. No swagger, no pretension, just calm professionalism. He wasn't there for drama. He was there to talk about his latest project, share a laugh or two, and head home. But from the moment he sat down, something felt off. The air was tight. The smiles at the table were strained. And at the center sat Denise Welch, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. But her tone, already sharp. The tension begins. The first question was harmless enough. One of the other panelists asked about Sean's new role, and he began to answer. Thoughtful, articulate, clearly passionate. But before he could finish, Denise cut in. "Can I just stop you there?" she said, her voice slicing through his sentence. "I think what everyone really wants to know is why you keep taking roles where you die. Is it because you're not good enough to be the lead who survives?" The studio fell utterly silent. A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. No one sure if it was meant as a joke. Sean blinked, visibly caught off guard, but managed a faint, good-natured chuckle. "Well, I wouldn't say that," he said lightly. "It's become a bit of a running joke, hasn't it? I've been lucky to play some great characters. Sometimes they just happen to meet unfortunate ends. That's storytelling." Denise doubles down. But Denise leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "A running joke," she repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. "Or maybe casting directors just don't trust you to carry a film all the way through. Ever think about that?" The tension was now thick enough to taste. One of the hosts tried to intervene to change the subject, but Denise talked right over her. She was in control now, and she knew it. Sean's jaw tightened. He was still calm, still measured, but something in his eyes had changed. "I don't think that's fair," he said quietly. "I've had a long career and I'm proud of my work. I don't need to justify my choices to anyone." Denise let out a mocking laugh. "Live, on camera." "Oh, here we go," she said, rolling her eyes. The sensitive actor routine. "Can't take a bit of criticism, can you?" The turning point. The audience murmured uneasy. This wasn't playful anymore. This wasn't banter. It was humiliation, and everyone could feel it. Sean's voice grew colder. "I can take criticism just fine," he said. "But what you're doing isn't criticism. You're being rude, for no reason." That was the moment everything changed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The tension snapped from awkward to electric. But instead of backing down, Denise raised her voice. "Rude? I'm being rude? You come on this show expecting us to fawn over you, to throw softball questions? This is Loose Women, not some press junket where everyone kisses your feet." Sean shook his head slowly. Disbelief etched across his face. "I didn't expect anyone to kiss my feet," he said softly. "I expected basic respect. That's all." The collapse. One of the other panelists, visibly panicked, tried to rescue the segment. "Sean, tell us about working with the director on this film," she said quickly, forcing a bright smile. "That must have been an amazing experience." But Denise wasn't done. She cut her co-host off mid-sentence, turning back toward Sean with a look that could only be described as venomous. And that's where the moment everyone would later talk about began. No, I want to address this," Denise said, raising a hand as another panelist tried to move on. Her tone was sharp, her eyes fixed on Sean like a hawk. "Because I think it's interesting that you're so defensive. If you're really that confident in your career, Why does a simple question bother you so much? Unless," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "there's a bit of truth to it." That was it. The moment everything shifted. You could see it in Sean's eyes. The realization that this wasn't an interview anymore. It was a setup, no matter what he said. No matter how calm or gracious he tried to be. Denise had decided he was the villain of her segment. Sean drew in a slow breath, his fingers resting against the edge of the table. For a moment, he said nothing. When he finally looked up, his expression was calm. But the warmth was gone. "You know what?" he said evenly. "I don't need to sit here and be spoken to like this. I came here for a conversation, not to be insulted." Denise laughed, a short cutting sound that echoed across the studio. "Oh, so now you're going to play the victim," she said mockingly. "You can dish it out in all your tough guy roles, but you can't take a little heat in real life?" Sean stood, just stood, quietly, deliberately. The audience froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the cameras kept rolling, unsure whether to cut or capture what was about to become live TV history. "I'm not playing anything," Sean said, his voice low but steady. "I'm choosing not to stay somewhere I'm not respected. There's a difference between asking hard questions and being deliberately cruel. And you, Denise." He paused, removing his microphone with calm precision. "You've crossed that line." There was no anger in his tone, only dignity, and that made it sting even more. Denise's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or fury. No one could tell. But she wasn't about to let him leave without a parting shot. "Fine," she snapped. "Walk off. Proves my point, doesn't it? Can't handle the pressure. Just another actor with an ego who can't take the truth." Sean stopped. He could have kept walking, but instead he turned back. His gaze locked on her. "The truth," he said quietly, "is that you've been hostile since the moment I sat down. I've done nothing but be polite, and you've gone out of your way to be cruel. That says a lot more about you than it does about me." The silence that followed was deafening. No laughter, no applause. Just the sound of tension hanging heavy in the air. Then, with a scraping of metal, Denise pushed her chair back and stood. "How dare you!" she hissed. "You come on my show and lecture me about how to do my job?" "Your show?" One of the other hosts muttered under her breath, barely audible, but just loud enough for the microphones to catch. Sean shook his head slowly, a faint, weary smile touching his face. "This isn't about your job," he said. "It's about basic decency, and right now you're showing none." He placed his microphone gently on the chair and turned to the audience. "I'm sorry you had to see this," he said sincerely. "This isn't what I wanted, but I won't stay where there's no respect. Not from anyone," the audience erupted. Not the polite clapping of a live studio crowd, but real, unfiltered applause. The kind that came from people who knew exactly what they'd just witnessed. Denise froze. The shock on her face said it all. Her own audience was applauding the man walking off her set. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath. But the microphone caught it. "Absolutely unbelievable." Sean walked toward the exit, shoulders straight, head high. A producer rushed over, whispering frantically, trying to convince him to stay. But Sean simply shook his head. Calm, final, done. Back at the table. Chaos. The other panelists were talking over each other, trying to salvage what was left of the show. One of them finally turned to Denise, her voice trembling. "That was completely out of order, Denise," she said. "You can't treat guests like that." "Oh, don't start!" Denise snapped. He was being oversensitive. If he can't handle a few tough questions, he shouldn't be in this business. Another panelist leaned forward, disbelief on her face. That wasn't tough questioning. That was a personal attack. We're supposed to make guests feel welcome, not tear them apart. The argument spilled over, voices clashing as producers frantically signaled to cut to commercial. But the damage was already done. Backstage. Aftermath. Behind the set, Sean was already gathering his things. Crew members hurried over, apologetic, flustered, ashamed. "I'm so sorry about that," one production assistant said, looking mortified. Sean gave a faint, understanding smile. "It's not your fault," he said softly. "You've all been wonderful. This is on one person, and one person only." The cameras faded to black, the chaos echoing from the studio floor behind him. And just like that, one of Britain's most respected actors had walked off Loose Women, leaving behind a stunned audience, a furious host, and a viral moment that would dominate headlines by morning. "You just humiliated a guest on live television. Do you have any idea how bad this makes us all look?" The producer's voice cut through the tense silence of the studio corridor. Denise crossed her arms, bristling. "I was trying to get a real answer out of him," she shot back. "Not just the same rehearsed nonsense we always get from actors." "By insulting him repeatedly?" Another host snapped. "By questioning his talent and mocking his career choices? That's not journalism, Denise. That's bullying." A makeup artist who had been lingering quietly by the door spoke up in a low, uncertain voice. The audience clapped for him when he left. "Not for you. That should tell you everything." Denise's face flushed crimson. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But no one did. Every person there had seen it. Everyone knew she'd gone too far. When the show returned from commercial break, the atmosphere was unrecognizable. The remaining panelists forced polite smiles, stumbling through lighter topics as if the previous segment hadn't happened. But the tension was inescapable. The damage had been done. The interview— no, the meltdown— with Sean Bean was all anyone would remember. Denise, once the loudest voice on the panel, barely spoke. Her trademark confidence had evaporated. She looked shaken, like someone realizing too late that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. One of the other hosts finally tried to address it on air, her tone careful and measured. "We'd like to apologize for the tension earlier in the show," she said. "Things got a bit heated, and we know that was uncomfortable to watch. We have nothing but respect for Sean Bean and his incredible body of work." It was a textbook attempt at damage control, but it landed flat. The viewers weren't fooled. They'd seen everything for themselves. They'd watched Denise tear into a guest for no clear reason, and they'd watched that guest respond with quiet grace and dignity. The show limped toward its ending, the usual breezy banter replaced with forced laughter and uneasy smiles. By the time the credits rolled, the studio was heavy with silence. Crew members packed up without a word. The other panelists left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Denise stayed seated at the table, staring at the empty chair where Sean had been minutes earlier. Whatever excuses she was telling herself didn't matter anymore. The damage was irreversible. In the green room, Sean was long gone. He'd left immediately, unwilling to stick around for awkward apologies or PR spin. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken for him. He had stood up for himself, with composure, with principle, and with dignity. The incident would soon become one of the most high-talked-about moments in British daytime television. Not for what was said, but for what it revealed. It showed what happens when a host's ego outweighs their professionalism. Sean Bean had walked onto that set, expecting basic respect. Instead, he'd faced condescension and hostility. And rather than smile through it for the sake of the cameras, he'd made the simplest, strongest choice of all. He walked away. No shouting, no theatrics, just calm resolve. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that self-respect isn't arrogance, and that no one, no matter how famous or humble, should have to endure humiliation in silence. Denise had tried to spin the story later, painting Sean as fragile and oversensitive, but the public saw the truth. They saw a professional man pushed past patience. They saw a host abusing her platform, and they saw the quiet, decisive act that drew the line. The walkout was brief, but it echoed loudly, because sometimes dignity, when tested, doesn't fight back. It simply stands up and leaves. But Denise had talked over them, dismissed them, and made it painfully clear that she was the one in control, that she was going to run the interview her way, no matter how uncomfortable it became. It was, in every sense, a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview, a cautionary tale about what happens when ego overshadows empathy, when confrontation replaces conversation. As Sean walked out of that studio, he left behind more than just an angry host and a shaken production team. He left behind a host who had publicly destroyed her own credibility in front of millions. He left behind a show that would now forever be associated with this ugly, humiliating moment. But most importantly, he left behind a powerful message about self-respect and boundaries. Because at the end of the day, that's what this was really about. It wasn't about Sean Bean being thin-skinned or unable to handle criticism. It wasn't about him being dramatic or difficult. It was about a line being crossed, again and again, and someone finally having the courage to say enough. The questions Denise had asked weren't probing or journalistic. They were calculated, designed to belittle, to corner, to humiliate. And when Sean didn't respond the way she'd hoped, when he didn't flinch, didn't break, didn't give her the explosive clip she was pushing for, she pushed harder. But Sean never took the bait. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her back. He simply drew a line, calmly and clearly, explaining why her behavior was unacceptable. And then he stood up and walked away. It was a moment of quiet power, a textbook display of grace under fire. The audience's applause as he left said everything. These weren't critics or PR agents. They were ordinary viewers, people who had tuned in expecting light conversation and instead witnessed a public ambush. And when Sean chose dignity over drama, they chose to applaud. That applause, more than anything Sean said, was the verdict. It cut through the studio air like a verdict being read aloud. It told Denise and everyone watching that she had completely misread the room. She had thought she was being brave, provocative, the fearless host unafraid to challenge her guest. But what people actually saw was cruelty. What they saw was a professional losing control of her own integrity. The panelists' discomfort told the rest of the story. From the moment the tone shifted, they'd tried, awkwardly, ineffectively, to reel the conversation back to neutral ground. But Denise had refused to listen. They couldn't stop her without turning the interview into a full-blown mutiny. And so they sat in frozen silence, watching the train wreck unfold in real time. When Sean finally left, their relief was visible. Not because they wanted him gone, but because the nightmare was finally over. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. The commercial break was filled with frantic whispers and raised voices, producers scrambling for statements, crew members exchanging shocked looks, panelists quietly arguing in corners. The damage control had already begun. But everyone knew the truth. There was no fixing this, and through it all, Denise remained defiant. Even as her colleagues challenged her, even as the audience's reaction made her position indefensible, she doubled down. She insisted Sean had overreacted. She refused to accept that she was the problem. That denial, so public, so transparent, only made things worse. It exposed an astonishing lack of self-awareness, a refusal to see what everyone else could see plainly, that she'd crossed from tough questioning into outright bullying. Because the truth is, even if Denise had believed her questions were fair, a good interviewer would have read the moment. A good host would have recognized discomfort and adjusted. But Denise mocked it. She turned Sean's boundaries into punchlines. She accused him of being too sensitive, of not being able to take it. She weaponized his composure and made it part of the attack. It was gaslighting in real time, on live television. And Sean saw it for what it was. That's why he left. Not because he couldn't handle scrutiny, but because he refused to tolerate disrespect. He saw that this wasn't journalism. It was theater. Cruel, empty theater. And in his final words to her, calm, steady, unmistakably sincere, he laid bare the truth. She had been hostile from the start. He had remained professional. She had been cruel, and everyone watching knew it. Then, before leaving, he turned to the audience and apologized. To them. For the uncomfortable scene they'd just witnessed. It was a moment of startling decency. In that brief gesture, he showed more respect for the viewers than Denise had shown for him throughout the entire segment. When Sean placed his microphone on the table and walked away, he demonstrated something far more powerful than defiance. He showed that walking away from disrespect is not weakness, it's strength. He showed that dignity doesn't have to shout, it just has to stand. The image of him leaving the set, calm and unshaken as the audience rose in applause, will remain one of the most unforgettable moments in talk show history. Not because of the chaos, but because of the quiet. Because one man, in that instant, reminded the world that self-respect is the story. Denise Welch had wanted a viral television moment that day. And she got one, just not the kind she intended. Instead of being remembered as a fearless interviewer who asked the tough questions, she became the textbook example of what happens when you confuse cruelty with courage and aggression with authenticity. Sean Bean, on the other hand, walked away with everything that mattered intact. His dignity, his composure, and his reputation. He had shown the world who he really was, a professional who knows his worth, a man unwilling to be diminished, and someone who understands that true strength isn't in fighting back. It's in knowing when to walk away.